It was a day like any other. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the untouched hiking trail. A soft breeze rustled through the leaves, creating a soothing symphony of nature. It was a perfect day for an adventure, and our protagonist, a woman of undeniable spirit and curiosity, was ready to explore the unknown. As she stepped onto the trail, her heart was fluttering with excitement. The thrill of discovery, the pleasure of solitude, the promise of the unknown, all these combined to create an intoxicating cocktail of emotions. Her boots crunched on the gravel, her eyes scanned the dense forest, her senses were alive with the raw beauty of the wilderness. But as she ventured deeper into the woods, she began to notice the uncanny stillness that hung in the air. The chatter of birds had faded into silence, replaced by an eerie hush that seemed to hold the forest in its grip. The rustling leaves, once a comforting lullaby, now whispered tales of unease. The vibrant forest, once teeming with life, now felt oddly deserted. She shrugged off the uneasy feeling, attributing it to her overactive imagination. But the further she went, the stronger the sense of isolation grew. The once familiar trail seemed to twist and turn into an alien landscape. She was alone, in an ocean of trees, under a sky that was gradually dimming. The sun, her only source of warmth and light, was beginning to sink behind the hills, casting long, foreboding shadows that made the forest seem even more ominous. And then she felt it, a bone-chilling coldness that made her shudder. It was as if the wilderness had suddenly turned its back on her. The forest, once her friend and sanctuary, now felt indifferent, even hostile. The silence was deafening, the isolation palpable. She was alone, far from civilization, caught in the tightening grip of an approaching night. The wilderness, once her friend, seemed to turn its back on her, leaving her feeling a chill of loneliness. As the day began to fade, an unseen danger lurked in the shadows. Our hiker, a woman of courage and resilience, pressed on, her footsteps echoing through the dense forest. The path was becoming less familiar, the shadows deeper, the silence more ominous. A sense of unease began to creep into her heart, the kind of unease that seems to seep from the very trees themselves when sunlight starts to wane. In the back of her mind, she tried to dismiss these feelings as nothing more than the usual trepidation one feels when darkness begins its descent. After all, it was only the impending twilight casting long, eerie shadows, playing tricks on her mind. Or so she thought. Her journey continued, each step moving her deeper into the heart of the wilderness. Then, out of nowhere, her foot found something unexpected, a hidden menace obscured by fallen leaves and the fading light. With a chilling snap, the jaws of a bear trap clamped down on her leg, the cruel metal teeth biting into her flesh. The shock hit her first, a white-hot bolt of surprise that made her heart feel like it was going to burst out of her chest. Then came the pain, an all-consuming agony that radiated from her trapped leg, coursing through her veins like a wild, untamed river. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the forest, bouncing off the trees and disappearing into the encroaching night. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the air sharp and cold in her lungs. The forest around her seemed to close in, the trees towering over her like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out as if to touch her, their leaves whispering secrets she couldn't understand. She was alone, so terribly alone, and amidst the deafening silence of the wilderness, her screams echoed unanswered. And there, in the heart of the wilderness, her screams echoed unanswered. With the sun disappearing behind the trees, a sense of dread washed over her. The world around her, once filled with the vibrant hues of the setting sun, was now slowly consumed by the ominous cloak of the night. The once welcoming chirps of the forest critters had now turned into a cacophony, a harsh reminder of her predicament. The biting cold of the bear trap around her leg had turned into a dull throb, a constant companion to her fear. The initial shock of the trap's cruel bite had given way to a desperate need to escape. She tugged at the unforgiving metal, a futile attempt against its relentless grip. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing her escalating fear. Her breaths came out in short, labored gasps, the frosty air stinging her lungs. Panic surged through her veins as she felt the trap dig deeper into her flesh. Each grueling second seemed like an eternity, the trap's icy grip a grim reminder of her plight. Her mind raced, flitting between the unbearable pain and the chilling realization of her predicament. She was stuck, alone, in the unforgiving wilderness. The encroaching darkness of the night was unrelenting, swallowing up the last vestiges of the day. It crept in, inch by inch, wrapping her in its cold embrace. The forest, once teeming with life, now seemed eerily silent, amplifying her sense of isolation. The shadows grew long and sinister, stretching out towards her like dark, gnarled fingers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twigs sent shivers down her spine, heightening her senses. Her eyes darted around, trying to penetrate the inky blackness, her mind creating monsters in every shadow. The forest was no longer a haven, but a prison, its bars forged from fear and uncertainty. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, her hope began to fade. The night was upon her, the darkness a stark contrast to the fading light of her hope. She was caught in a race against time, a race she could not afford to lose. Yet, with each passing moment, the finish line seemed to drift further away. The darkness brought with it an unsettling silence, her only company in these trying times. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, swallowed by the encroaching night, she found herself enveloped in a blanket of darkness. The vibrant forest, once teeming with life and sound, had turned into an eerie, silent landscape. The only sound was of her shallow, ragged breaths, each one echoed back at her by the towering trees, as if the very forest itself was mocking her plight. Pain radiated from her trapped leg, a cruel reminder of her predicament. But it was the silence that was truly agonizing, a haunting symphony of nothingness that hung heavy in the air, amplifying her feeling of vulnerability. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, amplified by the silence, sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her veins. She tried to break the silence, to pierce the oppressive quiet with her voice. She screamed for help, her voice pitched high with desperation. But the vast wilderness swallowed her cries, muffling them until they were nothing more than whispers on the wind. Her pleas for help bounced off the silent trees, only to be swallowed by the endless expanse of the forest. She screamed until her throat was raw, until her voice was nothing more than a hoarse whisper. But the silence remained, undisturbed, a cruel reminder of her isolation. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting, watching. The silence was not just a lack of sound, it was a presence, a living entity that seemed to close in around her, shrinking her world down to the small patch of forest floor where she lay trapped. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of her vulnerability, of her isolation. It was a tormentor, a jailer, a constant companion in her darkest hour. It was a silence that seemed to stretch on forever, a silence that whispered of her loneliness, of her despair. In the echoing silence, her pleas for help seemed to vanish into the night. As the night deepened, her situation became increasingly dire. The chill of the night air crept in, wrapping its icy fingers around her. She found herself in a battle against time, against the cold, and most of all against her own rising panic. With every passing moment, the forest seemed to grow darker, colder, more foreboding. Shadows danced and swayed on the trees, creating a macabre spectacle that threatened to consume her. The darkness was no longer just a veil of the night. It was a physical entity, pressing against her, smothering her, making her feel as if she was drowning in a sea of uncertainty and fear. She fought. Oh, how she fought. Against the biting cold, against the relentless grip of the bear trap, against the relentless march of time. Her fingers, numb and blue, clawed at the cruel metal that had ensnared her. But the trap, much like the forest, remained indifferent to her plight. Her strength, once so abundant, was now just a trickle, ebbing away with each passing moment. Yet she refused to give in. She refused to let the forest, the trap, the cold have the last word. Her spirit, despite her body's state, remained unbroken. She was alone, but she was not defeated. The forest might have been indifferent to her, but she was not indifferent to herself. She was a fighter, a survivor, and she would not go down without a fight. Her eyes, heavy with fatigue and pain, struggled to stay open. She was in a constant battle against sleep, a battle she knew she couldn't afford to lose. But even as she fought, her mind began to drift, to wander. The line between reality and dream blurred, and she found herself lost in a maze of thoughts and fears. As the first stars appeared in the sky, her fate remained uncertain, leaving us to wonder, will she survive the night? The answer to that question, much like the fate of our heroine, remains shrouded in the mystery of the night. Y'all, we're wrapping up here, but don't you go anywhere just yet. Show some love, hit that like button. Fancy more content like this? Go on, subscribe and let that bell icon ring so you won't miss a beat. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, sharing is caring. Until next time, stay tuned.